My son-in-law pushed me into the lake during a family picnic, laughing, "Swim, old man, like you're young again." His smug smile mocked my life's work, but I climbed out, wet, and stared at him intently. "It's your turn to dive, for the inheritance." That moment sparked a battle for respect and revenge. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Seriously, John, you still don't know what a QR code is? Tyler waved his phone in the air, that smug grin spreading across his face like spilled grease. "It's 2025, man. Even my grandmother figured this out before she passed." I gripped the spatula tighter, focusing on the burgers sizzling on the grill. The heat from the flames felt nothing compared to the fire building in my chest. Around us, the family picnic buzzed with forced cheerfulness. Maggie arranging potato salad on the checkered tablecloth. Our daughters Sarah and Olivia entertaining the Johnson kids on a blanket near the lake. Emily hovering between Tyler and me with that nervous energy she'd developed since marrying him. "I built this farm from nothing while you were still learning to tie your shoes," I said, flipping a burger with deliberate precision. "Technology changes, character doesn't." Tyler laughed, that sharp bark that made my teeth clench. Right. High-tech cows and all that. Very cutting edge, pops." Emily shot him a warning look. "Tyler, maybe we should—" "What? I'm just saying." He stood up from his lawn chair, stretching like he owned the place. "Sometimes old dogs need new tricks, you know." He pulled out his phone again, its sleek surface catching the afternoon sun. "Look, Bob, Linda, check this out." He turned toward our neighbors, deliberately angling away from me. "This app tracks everything. Inventory schedules, even weather patterns. Revolutionary stuff." Bob Johnson shifted uncomfortably in his folding chair. Linda focused intently on her corn on the cob. They'd known me for 20 years. They understood exactly what Tyler was doing. Maggie appeared at my elbow, her voice low and urgent. "The burgers smell wonderful, honey. Why don't we get everyone seated?" But Tyler wasn't finished. He moved closer to the grill, his phone still extended toward the other guests. "The thing is, you can't teach someone who doesn't want to learn. Some people are just stuck in their ways, right? Resistant to progress." Sarah and Olivia had stopped playing with the children. I caught Sarah's eye. She gave me a small nod, understanding passing between us without words. Olivia looked ready to stand up and march over, but Sarah put a gentle hand on her arm. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but the real heat came from the tension crackling between Tyler and me, like electricity before a storm. Cousin Rick, who'd been helping with the coolers, now stood frozen with a beer halfway to his lips. Even the kids sensed something, their laughter becoming quieter, more uncertain. I thought about all the years I'd spent building this land, this family, this life. Every callus on my hands told a story of early mornings and late nights. Every fence post I'd set, every crop I'd planted, every dollar I'd saved, all of it had led to this moment, watching my son-in-law mock everything I'd accomplished in front of people who respected me. "You know what your problem is, John?" Tyler stepped even closer, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne mixing with the smoke from the grill. "You're afraid of change, afraid of admitting that maybe, just maybe, someone else might know something you don't." The spatula trembled slightly in my grip. Around us the picnic had gone silent, except for the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore, and the distant hum of insects in the warm May air. Tyler smiled, sensing victory. "Tell you what, why don't you come over here and let me show you how a real grill master works? Time to learn from someone with faster reflexes than a pensioner." Tyler reached for my spatula without asking, his fingers closing around the handle just above mine. "See, the trick is timing, something you learn when you're not moving in slow motion." "Give me back my spatula." The words came out quiet, controlled, but there was steel underneath. I'd used that same tone when neighbors' cattle wandered onto my property. "Relax, old man, I'm just trying to help." Tyler tugged gently, testing my grip. "Why don't you grab a chair? Let someone with steady hands take over." Emily moved closer, her plate clutching forgotten in her hands. "Tyler, Dad's been grilling for 40 years. Exactly my point." Tyler's smile widened as he felt the spatula slide slightly in my sweating palm. 40 years of doing it wrong. Time for an upgrade. I tightened my grip, my knuckles going white against the black handle. Around us, the other guests had stopped pretending to eat. Bob Johnson cleared his throat awkwardly. Linda stared at her napkin like it held the secrets of the universe. The children had clustered near Sarah and Olivia, sensing the adult tension even if they couldn't understand it. "This is my grill," I said, each word deliberate as hammer strikes. "On my property, cooking food for my family." Tyler laughed again, that same sharp sound that cut through the afternoon air. "Your family? Emily's my wife now, in case you forgot. That makes this my family too." He gave the spatula another tug, harder this time. "Maybe it's time you accepted that things change, that you're not the king of this little castle anymore." The burgers were starting to burn. I could smell them charring, but I couldn't look away from Tyler's face. Couldn't release my hold on the spatula that had become a symbol of everything I'd built, everything I stood for. Maggie materialized beside us, her voice pitched with false brightness. "Boys, the potato salad is getting warm in this sun. Why don't we—" "Just a minute, Mom." Tyler's voice carried that patronizing tone he used when he thought he was being patient with the elderly. "Dad and I are having a little chat about efficiency, about knowing when to step aside and let the younger generation take charge." Rick set down his beer and started walking toward us, but I caught his eye and shook my head slightly. This was between Tyler and me. "You think respect is something you can just take?" I asked, still holding the spatula in our strange tug-of-war. "That it comes with age or marriage certificates?" "I think respect is earned." Tyler's grip tightened. "And I think some people confuse stubbornness with strength, tradition with intelligence." The insult hit exactly where he'd aimed it. I felt something cold and dangerous unfurl in my chest, something I'd kept carefully controlled for 65 years. Tyler must have seen it in my eyes because his confident smirk faltered slightly. "You know what?" He released the spatula suddenly, causing me to stumble backward a step. "Keep your little grill, John, but maybe next time, try not to burn the food while you're having your senior moment." He turned toward the lake, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Anyone want to cool off by the water? I think we could all use some fresh air." The suggestion hung in the warm afternoon, like smoke from the grill. One by one, our guests began gathering their things, eager for any excuse to escape the tension that had turned our family picnic into a battlefield. I stood there holding my spatula, watching Tyler saunter toward the lake with his hands in his pockets, whistling softly. Emily followed him with her eyes downcast, shame radiating from her like heat waves. The burgers continued to char behind me, forgotten. The group migrated toward the water like refugees fleeing a war zone. Tyler led the way, chatting loudly with the Johnson kids about water sports and summer camps, playing the role of the fun uncle while I walked alone behind them, still carrying the weight of his humiliation. Children's laughter echoed across the lake as they splashed in the shallows, their joy a stark contrast to the adult tension that had followed us from the grill. Maggie and the other women arranged lawn chairs in a semicircle on the shore, while the men stood awkwardly, beer bottles sweating in their hands. I walked to the end of our wooden dock, seeking a moment of peace away from Tyler's performance. The lake stretched out before me, mirror calm except for the gentle ripples created by the playing children. I'd built this dock myself 15 years ago, sunk every post, hammered every board. It was solid, dependable, like everything else I'd created on this land. "Hey everyone!" Tyler's voice boomed across the water. "John's going to show us his old-school swimming style. Right, Dad?" I turned, confused by the comment, and saw Tyler approaching along the dock behind me. His footsteps echoed hollow on the wooden planks, purposeful and measured. There was something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not just smugness, but calculated malice. "Tyler, what are you—" The push came without warning, not violent enough to be called an attack, but deliberate and perfectly timed. His hands hit my shoulders just as I was shifting my weight, just as I was most vulnerable to losing my balance. I felt myself falling backward, arms windmilling uselessly. Time slowed as I saw the sky wheel overhead, heard Tyler's triumphant laughter, felt the first shock of cold lake water closing over my head. When I surfaced, coughing and disoriented, Tyler was standing at the end of the dock with his arms crossed, grinning down at me like a predator admiring its prey. "Oops!" he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess those old reflexes aren't what they used to be." The water was shockingly cold against my skin, soaking through my clothes and stealing my breath. But worse than the physical shock was the humiliation. Standing waist-deep in the lake in front of my family, my neighbors, my grandchildren, while my son-in-law laughed at my expense. Emily had her hand pressed to her mouth, horror and shame warring in her expression. The Johnson kids had stopped playing, sensing that something serious had happened. Bob Johnson stood up from his chair, his face dark with disapproval. "Tyler!" Maggie's voice cut across the water like a whip. "What do you think you're doing?" "Just having some fun, Mom. Cooling Dad off after all that hot air by the grill." I began walking slowly toward shore, water streaming from my clothes, my gray hair plastered to my skull. Each step was deliberate, measured, while I fought to control the rage building inside me like a storm system. Tyler must have expected me to explode, to shout and curse and make a scene that would only confirm his narrative about the crazy old man losing his temper. Instead, I maintained eye contact as I waded through the shallows, wringing lake water from my shirt with steady hands. "You think this is funny?" I asked when I reached the shore, my voice calm as winter morning. Tyler's grin flickered. "Come on, John, learn to take a joke." I stood there dripping, surrounded by the shocked silence of my family and friends, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. For 65 years, I'd believed in dignity, in turning the other cheek, in being the bigger man. But watching Tyler's smug face, hearing the nervous laughter die in his throat as he finally recognized the danger in my eyes, I understood that some people only learn respect through consequence. "A joke," I repeated softly, still looking directly at him. "I'll remember that." The promise hung in the air between us, quiet as a whispered prayer, but carrying the weight of 30 years of accumulated wisdom about justice, patience, and the precise moment when forbearance becomes foolishness. Tyler's nervous laughter sounded forced now, uncertain. He'd won this battle, humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered. But something in my tone, something in the way I stood there dripping and unbroken, seemed to suggest that victory might be more expensive than he'd anticipated. 7 hours later, I closed the study door behind me and finally allowed myself to breathe. The house had settled into uncomfortable silence after we'd returned from the lake. Separate cars, wordless dinner, Maggie's concerned glances across the table, while Emily and Tyler made their excuses and left early. My shirt still carried the faint smell of lake water. I peeled it off, tossed it in the corner, and poured 3 fingers of bourbon with hands that didn't shake. Not anymore. The humiliation had crystallized into something harder, more useful. 40 years I'd built this legacy. Every fence post, every mortgage payment, every sleepless night during drought seasons had led to this moment. Watching my son-in-law mock everything I'd accomplished while my family sat silent as witnesses. I spread the documents across my mahogany desk like a general planning a campaign. Property deeds, bank statements, rental agreements, business valuations. The numbers told a story Tyler had never bothered to learn. Farm value at $1.8 million. Rental properties adding another $600,000. Business accounts pushing the total past $2.8 million. More importantly, Tyler's salary records from Emily's tax discussions last year. $62,000 annually for his IT consulting. Barely enough to cover their current lifestyle. Certainly not enough to maintain Emily in the comfort she deserved. He was counting on inheritance, banking on it. I pulled out a legal pad and began writing calculations. Without access to family assets, Tyler would need to find new housing within months of my death. Emily would be comfortable. The will ensured that. But her husband would discover exactly how much his disrespect had cost him. Property management to daughters only, I wrote. No spousal decision-making authority. The bourbon burned warm in my chest as I considered Tyler's reaction to learning his golden ticket had been revoked. All those comments about modernizing the business, about bringing the operation into the digital age, he'd been planning his takeover for months, maybe years. A soft knock interrupted my planning. Maggie entered with a tray of coffee and leftover pie, her face creased with concern. "You've been in here 2 hours," she said, setting the tray down carefully. "Don't let him get under your skin so deep it changes who you are." "Who I am." I set down my pen and looked at her, this woman who'd stood by me through everything. Who I am is a man who built something worth protecting, and Tyler just declared war on everything we've worked for. Maggie studied the papers scattered across my desk, understanding dawning in her eyes. "What are you planning, John?" "Justice." I picked up my pen again. Sometimes it takes a different form than people expect. She didn't argue, didn't try to talk me out of whatever she saw building in my expression. After 4 decades of marriage, she recognized the look I wore when facing down a problem that required permanent solutions. I reached for my phone to call Ed Brown, then remembered tomorrow was Sunday. Monday morning would be soon enough to set the wheels in motion. Some revenge was worth waiting for. Sunday morning coffee grew cold in my cup as I watched Tyler's BMW turn into our driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see him checking his reflection in the side mirror, smoothing his hair like he was preparing for a job interview instead of an apology. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her shoulders tense even from this distance. She'd insisted on coming, probably hoping her presence would soften whatever conversation was about to unfold. "They're here," I called to Maggie, who was deliberately busy reorganizing the pantry, her way of showing disapproval without starting a fight. Tyler approached our front door carrying a bottle of expensive whiskey, the kind that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Emily trailed behind him, her face pale and drawn, like she'd spent the night arguing about whether this visit was necessary. I opened the door before they could knock, not bothering to step aside or invite them in. Let Tyler make his case from the porch. "John, hey." Tyler's usual confidence had cracked around the edges. "Look, about yesterday, I brought this." He held up the whiskey bottle like a peace offering. "Thought maybe we could talk things through. You know how families are, right? Sometimes things get said. Sometimes things get done," I corrected, my voice flat as winter ground. Emily stepped forward, desperation bleeding through her carefully controlled expression. "Dad, Tyler feels terrible about what happened. We both do. It was just... tensions were high, everyone was stressed. Stressed." I repeated the word like I was tasting something bitter. "That's what we're calling it?" Tyler shifted his weight, the whiskey bottle trembling slightly in his grip. "Come on, John. We're family. It was just a joke that went too far. You know I respect everything you've built here. I mean, look at this place. It's incredible what you've accomplished." Family. There was that word again, delivered with the same casual entitlement he used when discussing my business plans or correcting my understanding of modern technology. "Family," I said quietly, "is an interesting word coming from you." Something in my tone made Emily flinch. She'd heard me use that voice before, when discussing problem tenants or dishonest suppliers, people who'd mistaken my patience for weakness until they discovered their error. Tyler sensed the danger but couldn't help himself from pushing forward. "I know you're upset, and I get it, but hanging on to anger, that's not good for anyone. Emily's caught in the middle here, and that's not fair to her." There it was, the manipulation I'd been expecting. Make it about Emily's comfort, about family unity, about anything except accountability for his actions. I accepted the whiskey bottle without warmth, without invitation, without the forgiveness Tyler was clearly expecting. "Thank you for this," I said, examining the label. "I'm sure Emily picked it out." Tyler's face reddened slightly. Even he could recognize a dismissal when it was delivered with surgical precision. "Well," Emily said quickly, "we should let you get back to your Sunday. We just wanted to clear the air." "The air is perfectly clear," I replied, still holding the unopened bottle. "Crystal clear." They retreated to the BMW with careful steps, Tyler's swagger notably absent. I watched them drive away, then set the expensive whiskey on the hall table, where it would remain unopened, a reminder of hollow gestures and empty words. Maggie appeared beside me as the car disappeared around the bend. "He still doesn't understand what he's done, does he?" "No," I said, reaching for tomorrow's calendar. "But he will." Monday morning found me parking outside Edward Brown's law office at precisely 10 o'clock, the manila envelope from yesterday's preparation tucked under my arm. The drive through downtown Lakeview had given me time to rehearse my request, to ensure I presented it as a business decision rather than an emotional reaction. Ed's surprise was evident when his secretary ushered me into his modest office. Family photos lined the walls alongside law degrees and community service awards, the kind of practice that handled real people's real problems rather than corporate abstractions. "John, this is unexpected. Please sit down." Ed gestured to the worn leather chair across from his desk. "Everything all right with Maggie? The girls?" "Everyone's fine." I settled into the chair, my envelope resting on my knee. "I need to discuss my will." Ed's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained professional composure as he retrieved my file from the cabinet behind his desk. The current will spread across his blotter. 15 pages detailing asset distribution, guardianship provisions, and the various legal mechanisms that protected 40 years of accumulated wealth. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" Ed asked, his pen poised over a legal pad. "Complete restructuring of inheritance access." I opened my envelope and withdrew the handwritten notes I'd prepared. "I want all business assets, including rental properties and farm operations, to pass exclusively to my daughters. No spousal access to management decisions or financial controls." Ed's pen stopped moving. "John, that's significant. Can I ask what's prompted this change?" "Tyler demonstrated yesterday that he lacks the character necessary to handle family responsibilities." I kept my voice level, factual. "I won't have him treating my life's work as his personal entertainment fund." "I see." Ed leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "You understand this could create substantial family conflict? Emily's marriage could be affected if Tyler discovers he's been excluded from—" "Tyler's marriage could have been affected by Tyler's behavior," I interrupted. "I'm simply ensuring my assets are protected from someone who views respect as optional." Ed pulled out a fresh legal pad and began sketching preliminary language. "We'll need specific provisions preventing future amendments that could circumvent these restrictions. Trust structures for the rental income, management committees for business decisions. Whatever it takes." I watched him work, satisfaction building as legal mechanisms took shape on paper. I want it airtight. No loopholes, no challenges, no way for Tyler to access what he hasn't earned. The farm alone is worth— Ed consulted the file— $1.8 million at current valuation. Adding the rental properties and business accounts, we're discussing nearly $3 million in total assets. The number hung in the air between us. Tyler's current salary would never approach the lifestyle he'd assumed was guaranteed through inheritance. Without access to family wealth, he'd discover exactly how expensive his arrogance had been. "Timeline for completion?" I asked. 2 weeks for drafting, assuming we can schedule witness appointments." "But, John, are you certain about this? Once these documents are signed and filed—" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Ed nodded slowly, recognizing the finality in my voice. "I'll begin drafting immediately. And, John, this conversation stays confidential until you decide otherwise." I stood, shaking his hand with the grip of a man who'd made his decision and found peace in it. The manila envelope remained on his desk, notes and calculations that would soon become Tyler's unwelcome reality. Walking back to my truck, I felt the weight of 40 years lifting from my shoulders. Sometimes justice required patience. Sometimes it required precision. And sometimes it required a man to protect what he'd built from those who would destroy it through casual cruelty. Tyler wanted to play games with respect. Now he'd learned the cost of losing. Emily's call came while I was reviewing Ed's preliminary documents at my kitchen table, her voice carrying the brittle brightness of forced optimism. "Dad, would you and Mom come for dinner tonight? I think we need to talk as a family." The invitation wasn't unexpected. Emily had always been the peacemaker, the daughter who smoothed over conflicts and mended fences. What she didn't understand was that some fences, once broken, were meant to stay down. 7 o'clock sound good?" she continued, filling my silence with nervous chatter. "I'm making that pot roast you like, the one with the carrots and—" "We'll be there," I said, cutting through her anxiety. The manila envelope rested beside my coffee cup, a reminder of the weapon now loaded and ready. Tyler wanted to play family games. Tonight, he'd learned the rules had changed. Maggie emerged from the pantry as I hung up, understanding immediately from my expression that the evening would be anything but routine. "Emily," she asked, "dinner invitation. Time to let Tyler know he's not as clever as he thinks." We arrived at their modern house precisely at 7, Maggie carrying a bottle of wine, while I kept my hands empty and my intentions hidden. Emily greeted us at the door with enthusiasm that didn't quite reach her eyes, her embrace lasting a fraction too long, the desperate hug of someone trying to hold her world together. Tyler remained in the living room, sprawled across their expensive leather sofa with his tablet balanced on his knee, the picture of casual confidence. He looked up as we entered, offering a smile that I recognized as carefully rehearsed. "John, Maggie, thanks for coming." He set aside his device with deliberate slowness, making sure we noticed the stock market app glowing on the screen. "Just checking some investments. You know how it is. Always something to monitor in the financial world." The house felt sterile compared to our farmhouse warmth. All clean lines and neutral colors, expensive furniture arranged more for appearance than comfort. Emily had tried to make it homey with family photos and throw pillows, but the space still felt like a showroom display of success Tyler couldn't actually afford. Dinner proceeded with forced conversation about weather and Emily's students, everyone dancing around the obvious tension, while Emily overcompensated with excessive attention to wine refills and bread passing. Tyler maintained his casual demeanor until midway through the main course, when confidence finally overrode caution. "So, John," he said, cutting his meat with theatrical precision, "I hope you've recovered from your little swimming adventure. Maybe next time we should get you one of those flotation devices. You know, the kind they make for seniors who want to stay safe around water." The comment hung in the air like smoke from a backfiring engine. Emily's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Maggie continued eating with deliberate calm, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Swimming," I repeated thoughtfully, watching Tyler's face for any hint that he understood the depth of his miscalculation. "Interesting word choice. Makes me wonder when it might be your turn to take an unexpected dive." Tyler's confident smile faltered slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Patience, Tyler. I've learned it's a virtue worth cultivating." I took a sip of wine, enjoying the way uncertainty flickered across his features, especially when dealing with family matters that require careful attention. "Dad," Emily interjected desperately, "maybe we could talk about something else. I made that chocolate cake you both love." "Family matters," Tyler interrupted, his voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "What kind of family matters?" I smiled at him across the table, the expression carrying no warmth whatsoever. "The kind that teach important lessons about respect, about consequences." I leaned back in my chair, completely at ease while Tyler struggled to interpret my meaning. "I suggest you enjoy this quiet time, son. Changes have a way of arriving when people least expect them." The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from cousin Rick, his gravelly voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd witnessed justice in action. "Heard about Tyler's performance at the picnic," he said without preamble. "Boy needs to learn some manners." Over the following week, similar calls trickled in from people who'd been there or heard about it through Lakeview's efficient gossip network. Bob Johnson stopped by Wednesday afternoon under the pretense of borrowing tools, spending 20 minutes explaining how young men these days didn't understand the value of showing elders proper respect. Meanwhile, Tyler began appearing at our farm with increasing frequency, always carrying small peace offerings, expensive flowers for Maggie, premium fertilizer he claimed was revolutionary for soil enhancement, a bottle of craft beer he'd driven 40 minutes to purchase. Each visit carried the transparent desperation of a man trying to gauge exactly how much damage he'd caused. "Just thought I'd check on the spring planting," he'd say, standing awkwardly in our kitchen, while Maggie thanked him politely for whatever gift he'd brought. "See if you needed any help with the technology side of crop management." I'd watch him probe for information, fishing for hints about my state of mind or future plans, his nervous energy betraying the anxiety building beneath his forced casualness. He'd ask oblique questions about family business and long-term planning, never quite direct enough to reveal his true concerns, but transparent enough that I could see straight through to his growing panic. Emily visited alone on Friday afternoon, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. She found me in the barn, repairing fence sections that didn't really need fixing, busy work that gave my hands something to do while my mind processed the week's developments. "Tyler's been having trouble sleeping," she said without preamble, settling onto a hay bale nearby. "He keeps talking about that dinner, about what you meant. Dad, whatever you're planning—" "I'm not planning anything, sweetheart." The lie came easily, wrapped in paternal concern. "I'm simply making sure our family's future is properly protected." She studied my face, searching for reassurance I couldn't provide. "He thinks you're going to do something to hurt him professionally or financially. He's been checking his credit reports, calling his clients to make sure everything's stable." Smart boy, I thought, but not smart enough. Tyler's credit reports would show him exactly what I'd already discovered: significant debt, maxed credit cards, and a lifestyle completely dependent on expectations of inheritance that no longer existed. The weekend brought an unexpected visit from Sarah and Olivia, both arriving separately but clearly coordinated. They found Maggie and me on the front porch, enjoying Saturday morning coffee and watching the fields green up with spring growth. "We've been talking," Sarah said, settling into the swing beside her mother. "About Tyler, about what happened at the picnic." Olivia leaned against the porch railing, her environmental studies having given her a direct communication style that cut through social pretenses. "He disrespected you publicly, Dad, in front of people who've known you for decades. That's not something you just forgive and forget." "We support whatever you decide to do," Sarah added quietly. "Emily's our sister, but Tyler chose his behavior. Actions have consequences." Their validation settled something deep in my chest, confirming that my response wasn't just an old man's wounded pride, but a family's collective recognition that boundaries had been crossed and accountability was required. Monday morning, I called Ed Brown's office and scheduled a follow-up appointment. When his secretary asked about the purpose, I simply said, "Finalizing family business." The manila envelope in my glove compartment had become a constant companion, documents waiting for the perfect moment to reshape Tyler's understanding of his place in our world. By Tuesday, Tyler's visits had become daily occurrences, his gifts growing more expensive and his questions more desperate. He'd lost weight, dark circles shadowing his eyes, the confident swagger replaced by barely controlled anxiety. "Maybe we should have a family meeting," he suggested during Wednesday's visit, his voice pitched with forced brightness. "Clear the air, talk through any misunderstandings. You know how these things can spiral if they're not addressed directly." I looked at him standing in my kitchen, this man who'd humiliated me in front of my community and now wanted to negotiate his way back to comfort and security. The irony was perfect. Tyler desperately needed a family meeting without realizing how catastrophically it would end for him. "That's not a bad idea," I said finally, watching relief flood his features. "Let me talk to Maggie about timing." Thursday evening, I marked May 31st on our kitchen calendar with a red circle, then called Emily to suggest Saturday dinner at our house. "Time for the whole family to sit down together," I told her. "Some conversations are too important for putting off." Saturday evening settled over the farm with the golden light of late spring, everything peaceful and ordinary except for the revolution about to unfold in our living room. By 6 o'clock, all the key players had assembled, Emily and Tyler on the couch, Sarah and Olivia in chairs flanking the fireplace, Maggie bustling with coffee service while I claimed my traditional seat, the leather recliner that had witnessed 4 decades of family decisions. Tyler perched on the edge of the sofa cushions, checking his phone obsessively, nervous energy radiating from every gesture. Emily sat rigid beside him, her teacher's instincts recognizing the formal atmosphere of serious consequences about to be delivered. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice carrying the calm authority I'd used for family announcements since the girls were children. "We need to discuss some recent events and their implications for our family's future." "If this is about the picnic," Tyler started, but I raised my hand, cutting him off with the gesture I'd perfected during countless board meetings and business negotiations. "This is about respect, Tyler, about understanding the difference between family and entitlement." I leaned forward slightly, making sure he felt the full weight of my attention. "You pushed me into that lake because you thought it was funny, because you wanted to humiliate me in front of people who've known me for decades." Emily's face flushed with shame. "Dad, Tyler already apologized." "Tyler bought expensive whiskey and offered empty words," I corrected. "That's not the same as understanding consequences." Tyler's phone slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the coffee table. "Look, John, I know you're upset, but..." "Upset?" I let the word hang in the air, tasting its inadequacy. "I'm not upset, Tyler. I'm taking action." I reached beside my chair and withdrew the manila envelope Ed Brown had prepared, the documents that would reshape Tyler's entire understanding of his place in our world. The rustling of papers filled the silence as I removed the new will, letting everyone see the official letterhead and legal seals. "This document represents 40 years of work, planning, and careful stewardship of resources that will ensure my daughter's security long after I'm gone." I held Tyler's gaze steadily. "It also represents my response to anyone who mistakes my patience for weakness." Tyler's face had gone pale, some primitive instinct recognizing danger, even before his conscious mind processed the threat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my estate will pass exclusively to my daughters, with specific provisions preventing spousal access to business decisions or asset management." The words landed with surgical precision, each syllable designed to cut away Tyler's assumptions about his financial future. You wanted to treat family gatherings like your personal entertainment venue. Now you can discover what that entertainment actually cost. You can't. Tyler started to stand, his voice cracking with disbelief. I can, and I have. I gestured to the legal documents spread across my lap. Edward Brown executed these changes Monday morning. They're filed, witnessed, and completely legal. The explosion I'd been expecting finally arrived. Tyler surged to his feet, his careful facade crumbling completely. This is insane! You're destroying Emily's future because of some stupid joke. I'm protecting Emily's future from someone who views her inheritance as his personal lottery ticket, I replied calmly. Someone who thinks respect is optional and consequences are negotiable. Emily burst into tears, her hands pressed to her mouth as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. Sarah and Olivia sat frozen, their faces reflecting complex emotions. Sadness for their sister's pain, but unmistakable approval of their father's decisive action. Tyler's mask had completely slipped away, revealing the entitled, grasping man I'd always suspected lurked beneath his polite surface. You vindictive old fool! You think money gives you the right to control people's lives? Money gives me the right to control my money, I said quietly, and my money will never be yours. He stormed toward the door, his face twisted with rage and desperation, then spun back for one final attack. Emily, are you going to let him do this? Are you going to choose his petty revenge over our marriage? Emily looked up at him through her tears, seeing perhaps for the first time the man she'd actually married, rather than the charming facade he'd presented during courtship. I'm going to choose my family, she whispered. Tyler slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows, his tires spinning gravel as he tore out of our driveway. Emily followed him outside, her sobs echoing across the evening air, while the rest of us sat in the sudden silence, processing the earthquake that had just restructured our family's landscape. The manila envelope lay empty beside my chair, its contents finally delivered after 2 weeks of careful planning. Tyler's joke had lasted 30 seconds. My response would last forever. Sunday morning found me in the barn before sunrise, my hands working automatically to repair fence sections that didn't really need fixing. The physical labor helped quiet the storm in my mind. Questions about Emily, about whether I'd pushed too hard, about the cost of teaching Tyler his lesson. Maggie had coffee ready when I returned to the house, her eyes puffy from a restless night. She'd set the table for 3 out of habit, then quietly removed Emily's place setting when she realized her mistake. The empty space spoke louder than any conversation we might have attempted. She needs time, Maggie said, more to herself than to me, stirring sugar into her coffee with unnecessary precision. My phone sat silent on the counter, its black screen reflecting our worried faces. I'd checked it a dozen times since waking, hoping for a text, a call, any sign that our daughter was processing Saturday night's revelation rather than drowning in it. Monday brought Cousin Rick's visit under the pretense of borrowing my post-hole digger. He stayed for 2 hours, helping with genuinely unnecessary fence work while carefully avoiding any mention of Emily's absence. His presence reminded me that the community supported my decision, that I hadn't acted from petty vindictiveness, but from paternal duty to protect what I'd built. Man's gotta stand up for his family, Rick said, wiping sweat from his forehead as we loaded tools back into the barn. Some folks understand respect, others have to learn it the hard way. Tuesday evening brought Sarah, arriving with a casserole and the excuse of needing advice about a difficult client. She stayed past sunset, helping Maggie with laundry and keeping conversation flowing around the elephant-sized absence in our living room. Her confidence in my decision helped steady the doubts that crept in during quiet moments. Emily's smart, Dad, she said as she prepared to leave. She'll figure out what Tyler really was, and she'll understand why you did what you did. Wednesday afternoon delivered Olivia with her environmental studies textbooks and a request to use our kitchen table for a group project that never materialized. Instead, she spent 3 hours explaining carbon sequestration techniques, while Maggie baked bread and I pretended to understand soil chemistry. Her young adult certainty that justice had been served provided an anchor against my growing worry. Tyler showed his true colors when the money disappeared, she said, with the black and white clarity of 28 years. Emily's better off without someone who only loved her inheritance. Thursday evening, I found myself checking the calendar, counting days since Saturday's confrontation. 5 days felt simultaneously like an eternity and no time at all. Emily had always been our most thoughtful daughter, the one who processed decisions carefully before acting, but 5 days of silence stretched my patience thin. "Maybe we should call," Maggie suggested, washing dishes with more attention than they required. "She knows where we are," I replied, though my conviction wavered with each passing hour. "When she's ready to talk, she'll come home." Outside, summer cicadas hummed their ancient songs while I stood on our front porch, scanning the road for headlights that never appeared. The manila envelope that had started this whole sequence sat empty in my study, its work complete. Tyler's joke had lasted 30 seconds. My response would echo through generations. But as I watched the sun disappear behind our fields, I wondered if protecting Emily's future had cost me her presence. Justice and love weren't always compatible, and the space between them felt wider with each silent hour that passed. Thursday evening dinner proceeded with forced normalcy until headlights swept across our dining room windows, causing both Maggie and me to freeze mid-conversation. I recognized Emily's Honda immediately, its familiar silhouette triggering a flood of relief and apprehension. She sat in her car for several minutes, engine running, gathering courage for whatever conversation awaited inside. Through the window, I could see her silhouette against the dashboard lights, shoulders curved with exhaustion, head bowed as if in prayer. When she finally walked to our front door, each step measured and deliberate, I noticed the changes a week of emotional upheaval had carved into her appearance. Her professional blazer was wrinkled, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a careless ponytail, makeup absent except for dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. I opened the door before she could knock, and Emily collapsed into my arms without a word. Her tears came in great shuddering sobs that shook her entire frame. 40 years of trust between father and daughter, crystallizing into this moment of absolute forgiveness and understanding. "I'm sorry," she whispered against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry I didn't see what he was." Maggie appeared beside us, her maternal instincts activating as she guided Emily toward the kitchen, our family's traditional sanctuary for processing both celebration and crisis. The kettle went on automatically. Tea bags emerged from the cupboard, and within minutes we'd recreated the healing rituals that had carried us through decades of various family storms. "He left Monday morning," Emily said, cradling her mug like a lifeline. "Packed his clothes, took his car, said if I chose my family over our future together, he didn't want any part of the poverty I'd inherited." The cruel irony hit me like a physical blow. Tyler's departure had proven every assumption underlying my decision. He'd loved Emily's inheritance, not Emily herself. When the money disappeared, so did his commitment to their marriage. "He called your will vindictive manipulation," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength as she processed Tyler's betrayal aloud. "Said real families don't use money as weapons, that I should force you to change it back if I wanted our marriage to survive." "And what did you tell him?" Maggie asked gently, refilling Emily's tea without being asked. "I told him that real husbands don't abandon their wives because inheritance plans change." Emily looked up at me, her eyes clear despite the tears. "I told him that maybe he should have thought about that before he pushed my father into a lake for entertainment." The front door opened to admit Sarah and Olivia, both arriving within minutes of each other, clearly summoned by Maggie's efficient text message network. They surrounded Emily with the fierce protectiveness that had characterized our daughter's relationship since childhood, offering practical support without drama or judgment. "We can get your things tomorrow," Sarah said, settling beside her sister at the kitchen table. "I've got a truck, and Olivia knows people who can help with heavy lifting." "Already researched local lawyers for the divorce proceedings," Olivia added with characteristic efficiency. "Found 3 who specialize in protecting women's assets from predatory spouses." Emily laughed, the first genuine sound of joy I'd heard from her in weeks. "You 2 have been planning my escape route?" "We've been planning Tyler's comeuppance since he made that joke about Dad's swimming skills," Sarah replied. "We just didn't know it would happen this efficiently." As the evening wore on, Emily's color returned, her posture straightened, and something resembling hope began replacing the devastation that had marked her arrival. She'd lost a husband, but she'd gained clarity about what marriage should actually mean. Partnership rather than parasitism, support rather than exploitation. "I need to see where it all started," she said finally, looking toward the window that faced the lake. "I need to go back to that dock and understand what you were really protecting me from." 3 weeks later, we returned to the lake as a complete family, not running from the memory this time, but confronting it with the wisdom that only comes from surviving the storm that follows difficult truths. Emily had insisted on the trip, saying she needed to reclaim the space where Tyler's cruelty had revealed itself so clearly. The same picnic tables, the same weathered dock, the same gentle lapping of water against the shore. But everything felt transformed by our shared understanding of what had really happened here. Maggie spread our checkered tablecloth with the confidence of a woman whose family had emerged stronger rather than broken, while Sarah and Olivia arranged folding chairs with the easy efficiency of sisters who'd found their rhythm again. Emily stood at the water's edge, no longer the confused daughter torn between loyalties, but a woman who'd learned to distinguish between love and manipulation, between family and transaction. The afternoon sun caught the gold in her hair as she watched ripples spread across the surface, each one carrying away a little more of the pain Tyler had caused. Water has a long memory, I said, joining her on the dock where I'd been humiliated and she'd been deceived. But it's also good at washing things clean when the time comes. She leaned against my shoulder, solid and present, in a way she hadn't been for months before Tyler's departure. I understand now why you didn't tell me about changing the will beforehand. I would have tried to stop you, wouldn't I? I would have defended him. You would have protected someone you loved, I corrected. That's what good people do. The problem was that Tyler never deserved that protection. Behind us, Maggie called, that lunch was ready, her voice carrying the contentment of a mother whose children had all found their way safely home. Olivia was explaining some environmental project to Sarah, their animated conversation proving that our family's foundation remained solid despite the earthquake Tyler had caused. I've been thinking about going back to school, Emily said as we walked toward the table together. Maybe getting my master's degree, focusing on administration. I want to build something of my own, something that can't be taken away by someone else's expectations. Your inheritance will cover that easily, I replied, pride swelling in my chest. That's what it's there for, helping you become whoever you're meant to be. As we settled around the table, Emily chose the seat facing the lake rather than turning away from it. She'd stopped running from the memory of Tyler's cruelty and started using it as fuel for her own growth. The woman who'd been pushed around by a man's entitlement had become someone who understood her own worth. To family, Maggie said, raising her glass of lemonade in a toast. The kind that protects without asking for payment in return. To justice, Sarah added, her lawyer's instincts recognizing the deeper principles at work in our story. To consequences, Olivia contributed with her young adult's appreciation for cause and effect. To learning the difference, Emily finished, looking directly at me with gratitude that needed no explanation. As we packed up our picnic supplies and prepared to leave, I took one last look at the dock where Tyler had thought he'd won something by humiliating an old man. He'd been so focused on his moment of triumph that he'd never noticed the deeper currents moving beneath the surface: family loyalty, generational wisdom, and the quiet power of a father who'd spent 40 years learning exactly how to protect what mattered most. We walked away from the lake together, my arm around Emily's shoulders and my legacy secure in the hands of daughters who understood that respect flows both ways across generations. Tyler's joke had lasted 30 seconds, but our family would last forever. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.